Welcome to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I am Damona Peacock, a fabulous, non-binary, neurospicy, ordained queerdo with a fascination for all things cycles, symbolism, and patterns.
And I'm Moonkittee, a queer femme poly kitchen witch and a proud geek. Today's topic is witchiness as mindfulness with our guest speaker, Kat. Hello.
Hi. Meow.
You will and always be cat to me. But
Yeah.
for the
Right.
broader audience, this is Kathleen Zwickl. Yes, and a great friend of ours.
Mhm.
Beautiful witchy friend that we love very, very much. And thank
Yeah.
you so much for joining us today and bringing your topic idea to life.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm
we
I'm
actually roped
excited.
in a listener.
It's true. I've been listening since the beginning. I told you I listened in the car with my daughter, and she thinks it's so cool. Like, those are your friends.
That's so
That's
awesome.
right.
I would like to share your bio, if I
Yeah.
may.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Kathleen is a queer poly community activist, business owner, and caregiver. As an early childhood educator, she uses passion for social justice and neurodivergent education to create and protect space for subversive communities while advocating for all children's future. Did I get
That
that right? All right.
is fascinating and amazing.
Yay.
Well, it's like when we were kind of prepping for this, and I said, I was like, have you ever realized something is your special interest when you didn't know it was your special interest before?
Mhm.
And that's kind of been the culmination of this for me is like as a concept. It's something that I've been mulling around in my brain for years. And the more like I expand on it, I'm like, oh, I'm really fixated on this whole concept. I'm constantly like, yes, and then their brains.
The way brains work.
Did you know?
Well, I love that. But before we really
Mhm.
diving into the
Mhm.
topic,
Yes.
we'd like to ask you the question that we always ask our
Oh,
guests.
yes. Yes.
Right. And that question is, what does the term queer witch mean to you?
So I think there's like two ways. There's like what
Mhm.
comes into your mind right away, and then there's like what it means to you personally.
Yeah.
And I think that like the image of a queer witch is on this really cool path where it used to be female and
Mhm.
only female. And queer has always had its own connotations, and it's either, like the lesbian or like the teenage witch, like, and that's where that falls in. And so there's that idea. But now we're getting to this point in society where queer witch is becoming ungendered for me,
Mhm.
and more I'm seeing a gender neutrality to it, which I love. I am so excited to see the community opening up that way. What it means to me personally, um, it has to do with like engaging in the true intimacies that like people shy away
Mm.
from, or they don't feel like they don't give it the light. To me, almost like the queer witch community is a lot of shadow work. It's the people willing to engage in the shadow work and then move forward.
Mhm.
Which again ties back into what I was going to talk about today. So, like I said, hyperfixation, no big deal.
Would you consider that just curious now, but do you identify as a queer witch?
Yeah, I do, and queer has always been like life-giving to me to pick up as a title because I am straight presenting, I am cis, but I'm definitely not normal, and I'm definitely not straight, and everybody's always known it.
Yeah.
And so queer has always fit a little bit better for me as I've grown in that journey myself. I know you guys have talked about before, like the difference between like bi and pan and how we choose what title that's going to be for us. And I hated that when I was younger. I just,
Mhm.
I, it was not for me. So, I love the identity of queer not being pigeonholed to one
Hmm.
thing. It's being more than just being gay now,
Mhm.
which is great. And um, the witchy term is also growing on me. Well, is growing on me. It's one that I like stayed away from before, and I just went, oh, I'm eclectic pagan. Oh, you know, I'm Gnostic, or I'm, like through my life, I always had a different title for it. But the more you educate yourself, the more you learn. And it turns out everybody's a witch. So,
And you are very witchy.
yes.
I like that you are coming into your power in that. In
That's
both
the
of those,
theme.
honestly.
Yeah.
I'm, blessed to have known you long enough to watch the transformation and
Yeah.
everything.
You
And I
practically
wouldn't
no
even call
nice
it a
to try it.
transformation as much as an awakening.
Yeah, it feels like that sometimes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's again engaging with my inner, more intimate self and like bringing it forward.
And having the courage to do that because it
Yeah.
takes, our topic at hand, witchiness
Mhm.
is mindfulness. What does that mean to you other than being an obviously discovered hyperfixation?
I had talked a little bit about how for me engaging in witchy rituals and things like that is a very comforting thing for my brain, and I didn't really understand why. And there were like several times in my life where I had to put everything back in the closet, and I'd have to approach the important people in my life and say, I need this for my mental health, and I need you to not touch it. I need you to not care about it. I don't want you to side eye me about it. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
you to like make fun of my candles. You need to leave it there for me because right now I need this. And under that context, everyone was like, yup, that's fine. Meditate, light your incense, like set your path. When it's given in that dosage, I need it for my mental health. This is a treatment system, and people let you have it. The more I have personally engaged with therapy and gone out into the communities and made my own bonds with the different queer communities and different witchy and pagan communities, and seeing these people and the overlap again and again of either you've been through therapy for so long, or honey, you need to go. Like, girl, get you there. Um, and what we have here are two or more. Well, I'm going to keep saying two because queer and witchy don't always overlap, but we're going to talk about them like,
Because there is an amazing
there is
blossoming
an overlap.
overlap.
There is. And what you see in both of these communities are humans who have been hurt and traumatized and pushed away from their safe spaces. And they're drawn towards these communities again because it makes them feel safe and seen in what they're doing. And there's so much to say about like being able to see yourself in your community is so important. And so finding those spaces where you can see yourself in them is the first step.
Yeah.
But we all also have had those interactions either as younger queers ourselves or as elders, where you see the younger queer come into the group and you watch them kid in a candy store around you, and you're like, they'll be fine once they do the work. That like they found it, they're gonna splash around a little bit,
Yeah.
and then it's gonna be time for them to start doing the work. And what I started noticing when I was engaging in more therapeutic practices and researching things about, because I see PTSD and learning how to heal some of those parts in my brain, and
Relatable.
like and what I would have to do for that. And I've been a long time person in therapy, like over half my life, and so I come with a toolbox. Like,
Yeah.
I warn every new therapist I ever work with, I've been doing this for a while for myself. I come with a set of tools that I already know how to use. And you know what? I was realizing in trying to engage in treatment with my CPTSD, that they were all witch things. They were all things that if I dressed them up, were the practices I was already doing. And they were things that I was doing in some of the most difficult parts of my life because they made me feel better. Well, they made me feel better because they were actual, like, scientific things happening behind my brain that were connected to the rituals, that were connected to giving myself time, and space, that were actual, like, scientific reasons why engaging with witchcraft and these rituals did make me feel better. It did work. And I get so fascinated by that. And so I go down all these little rabbit holes. In this instance here was one of the things that I think is really like my favorite example to give about this when I'm talking is meditation. And so the thing that kind of tickles me about meditation is that everybody thinks that they're doing meditation wrong or that they can't do it. because there's too much going on in their brain and they can't just like slow down and zen out and be in the moment. And that's not actually what meditation is about at all.
Okay.
I mean, it can be like you can
Right.
use it personally for that, absolutely. But
What, you're
like,
telling me the movies are not correct when you're
so
supposed to sit there and go blank?
no,
Quiet your mind.
it's almost like they planned it that way, as if maybe everything was
Oh,
perfect and they didn't
Right.
have traumas to work through. They didn't have, kids or
neurodivergence.
deadlines or work projects. Yeah, no, 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 no. But when you're engaging in meditation, what you're supposed to do is try and clear your mind. And then when the thing comes up, it's okay if it's a stressful thing. It's okay if you're thinking about, your bills, your dishes, or whatever, but then you send that thought away. And then you focus on what you're meditating on. And that could be a sense of peace. It could be, I'm meditating on a direction I want to go in life. And that thought practice, the finding the thought and sending it away, is what changes the neural pathways in your brain. So, what you're doing by meditating is recarving these positive neural pathways and
Mm.
directing how you want to process those things. And even if you are thinking of a new thing every 3 seconds and can't stay on one subject while you're meditating, you're still doing the actual physical work in your brain to refile and compartmentalize those things. Like with Tetris, they talk about like after traumatic events, one of the things that they've said is survivors can go home and play Tetris because it helps your brain reconfigure and box up every little thing, and you can sit there and go, oh, this piece goes here. Oh, that piece goes there. And it does the same regulatory things in your brain and for your body. And so meditation does that. And what do they tell you in therapy all the time? If not, go home, sit with your thoughts, give them space, feel them, release them. It could be for
Mm-hmm.
you in the present, it could be for your inner child, but this concept of like allowing that to exist, embracing it and letting it go. And they're all the same thing. That's kind of like the one that I love about meditation.
Something else I
Especially
love about honestly, like queering the idea of meditation
Mhm.
mhm,
is that it doesn't have to be a sitting still, quiet,
no.
you know, you can fidget your way into a meditative state.
Mhm,
You can stem, sorry, speaking as the ADHD over here, but you can stem your way into a meditative state.
mhm,
You can follow an audio meditation for those who are very or just put on the right kind of music that or bilateral beats I really like.
mhm.
The ones that go make you
That
because like
oh, yeah.
the
Mhm.
back and forth because you're like then you're crossing your
Mhm.
wires and between the two hemispheres
Exactly.
of your brains and
Yeah.
the brain science, yes.
It's amazing.
Or
Yeah.
even just a walking meditation. Like,
Mhm,
so I've this year just in dealing with random weird grief that comes up, I've started just like walking it out and
mhm,
telling myself like if I go walk now in 20 minutes I will have endorphins
mhm.
and I'll feel a little improved.
Yep. And I love that you brought that up because when you're talking about mindfulness in therapy, there are like 5 central things that you do to engage with mindfulness. Um, so there's mindful breathing, which you're going to be using to calm and regulate your body, right? And focus on where you are in the moment. And a variety of traumas take you out of your body and out of the moment, and being able to center where you are is
Mhm.
important. Concentration and protecting that concentration so you can take care of yourself internally, and maybe that means removing yourself from the situation, or
Mhm.
maybe it means like setting a specific time for something. um Releasing tension, again, that's going to be, you can do guided meditations where you're slowly releasing the tension in your body. And walking meditation is another one too. And all
Mhm.
of those are because they have to do with creating space to engage with your inner self and do that work, and also protecting yourself in those moments.
Mhm.
Because you're right, with the walking meditation, that is what you're doing. You're giving yourself the endorphins. You're letting your body move and release the stress and energy. And you want to talk about, in ADHD bodies, the amount of extra energy that is kept in their body and their brains that keeps them from being able to sit and process and engage in the therapy. Like, that's
Yeah.
absolutely, walking meditation is something that you can engage in to help with that. And if you want to take your staff and you want to take your bag and you want to call it like a nature walk and communing,
Mhm.
with your icons, like,
Mhm.
more power to you. Then you get
Hmm.
to make it something beautiful for yourself. But like, the
Yeah.
doctor's going to tell you to do the same thing anyways, right?
Hmm.
The therapist is going to tell you, go take a walk, go sit at home with your thoughts, let yourself feel these feelings. Um, and as people who are engaging in witchcraft, we get an extra like aesthetic. It's an extra treat. Have a walk for a treat. Like,
That little boost.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And because we've given it this priority spot in our life, we get to engage in it again and again and again and again. And it could be even in our, more closeted moments where we can't share this with the people around us, but we're still sneaking off to our tiny corner to light our incense or just hold our thing, like our cards or our crystal or whatever it might be that's significant to us. And even in those tiny, tiny acts of self preservation, we're still doing it
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
you've created that item where that is a place for that feeling.
Mm.
So you save up whatever it is you're feeling about how you engage with your power and yourself, and then sneaking off to that corner and engaging with that for a second. And that's what, like, if that's all you have, your therapist would tell you 100% good job, you did it. Like,
Hmm.
Yeah. I love all these ideas that people can get just from this episode because,
Right.
unfortunately, and we've talked about this, is I do think everybody could benefit from having access to some kind of therapy, and
mhm,
not everyone in the world is unfortunate, fortunate enough to have the privilege to have access to what therapy is available these days, which isn't always often, sometimes
uh-huh.
even just navigating the system can be really
Oh yeah. Well,
terrible.
and we're still decolonizing and desexualizing therapy in a modern way anyways.
Hmm.
But do
Oh,
you
I
know it?
could rant. I could rant.
We'll do it one day. Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me started. We're still unpacking the absolute colonialism and sexism that happens in therapy. And again, the more I'm researching my own healing path, the more I'm like, we need to talk about this. Don't
Hmm.
even freaking get me started. Like, did you know the first dose of Prozac wasn't used to treat depression until 1989? That's the
Doesn't
year I was
surprise me.
born. Prozac as a use for depression, the most commonly used medication to help people that go through depression, is as old as I am.
Hmm.
But every culture has had a healer. Like you were saying before, we wish that therapy was more available to the masses
Yeah.
and more accessible, but it,
Hmm.
it is, and it has been, because even pre, 1989, when we started being able to hand out medications to help, there still had to be a way, right? Like, we still existed. We still had feelings. We still had traumas. We still had emotional and mental needs to be taken care of. And when you go back and you look at the other societies that relied on their healers, they weren't just medicinal. Like, they were people that you went to with problems of your heart and your soul. And if you couldn't get something right with yourself or your family, you were turning to these magical humans that had this gift and going to them. Who's to say that the chat in their garden where they gave you a flower and said, go make some tea with this
Hmm.
and come back, you'll feel a lot better about your problems with your partner. And then that person goes home and they meditate on it and they let their brain go out and come back, and they're doing the magic themselves and they're engaging in therapy. And
They just don't realize that's what it is.
yeah.
I always get really fascinated by the DSM-5 or whatever it
Mhm.
is now that they call it.
Mhm.
And it's a, excuse my language, but it's a big ass book. And you know what that book symbolizes to me? A collective of brains trying to understand how the brain works.
It is. The DSM-5 was also not created for the whole world or the whole human experience.
For
Right.
for those of our listeners and myself included in this one, what exactly is the DSM-5?
The
A
DSM-5,
diagnostic manual for mental health
yeah.
disorders,
So
essentially.
that's, yeah, that's where you get your stamp on your file. Is if you want to go in and figure
Get a
out, like, do I fall on the spectrum? Do I have bipolar? Do I have BPD? Like, the DSM-5 is the widely used system for figuring out where you're at and giving you your diagnosis.
And I
But
think it's called
oh, go ahead.
5 because it's been through several iterations, kind of
Yeah.
like the
Mhm.
Bible. Like none
Mhm.
of these things are perfect because they're literally come from human brains, a collective
Mhm.
of them, and well-educated ones, but we're still not studying everything, and we still don't know what we don't know, but
Yeah.
we still think we know so much. But
Hmm.
it's
Mhm.
actually we're giving, sometimes we give stuff like that too much credit, but I mean it's also very valid and necessary to
Yes.
access within a social societal situation, accommodations, so sometimes getting a diagnosis, getting that care,
Mhm.
getting accommodations, getting on disability is necessary for people.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
like this,
Absolutely.
woo, it's yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing about the DSM-5 that I feel like is really pertinent in this part of the conversation is that it is written by a society who is not embracing of women and queers. Period. The end. Like, when you go back in history and you see the points where women were treated for hysteria with lobotomies and things like that, it's from the
Mm,
DSM-5. Transsexuality only recently left the DSM-5.
Hmm.
mm-hmm.
So up until very recently, you could still be diagnosed with a mental disorder for living your life. Not only that, but in our current political climate, that also outs you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it circles back to that, like, the mental health isn't set up yet for queer spaces. It's still being built for that. Which I am really convinced is why you see people finding comfort in rituals,
Hmm.
is why you see them finding healing in these communities, because the therapy world at large is still not
Trying to catch
ready.
up. Yeah.
Like I said earlier, I'm straight presenting, I'm cis, all that stuff, but when I sit down with my toolbox with my therapist, I still have to hand them a dictionary.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. When I found my therapist, I started out with like, these are things that you have to accept about me that we're
Hmm.
not changing. And one of
Yeah.
them is, my spirituality and, religious trauma. Like we can deal with that, but we can't change my spirituality. And,
Hmm.
Hmm.
this is how I choose to medicate. And I don't want you messing with that. And,
Yeah.
but here are the things over here that I would love help working on. And
Right.
yeah, so I was very
And
clear with those boundaries.
I love the way you put that too, because this is how I'm choosing to medicate. Because again, the the overlap there that I'm drawn to in subversive communities is when you're spiritual and when you're pagan and when you're witchy, they look down their nose at you a little bit,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's
It's
not as
outside of the norm.
credible. Yeah, it's outside of the norm. It's not as credible as any religion following Yahweh, God, like Christianity, Catholicism,
Mhm.
even the Islamic religion. If they were to say, "This is my faith, I'm using it to treat me and heal me," then the society at large would accept that.
Mhm.
But how many memes lately have you seen about, like, girls rubbing their crystals in their moon water and, like, making fun and making light of that? And almost every
Yeah.
single one of them is a survivor trying to heal from someone hurting themselves.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And if you tried to tell your therapist, I'm going to go home and light my candle and I'm going to meditate on this, I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to, I'm going to see what Persephone has to say about
Yeah.
Hmm.
that. That's not really an acceptable answer.
Right. But the funny thing, the interesting here in that it's like, you say, I'm going to light my candle, I'm going to meditate and see what Persephone has to say about it. You look askance. But if you go home and say, I'm going to light my candle, somebody says, and meditate on what God is going to tell me what it is, perfectly acceptable. The only
Mhm.
change in that entire thing was the deity for whom
Mhm.
that the
Mhm.
meditation is going towards. So that is really,
Mhm.
really fascinating to bring up that
Yeah.
idea of it is a practice that we're already doing. It just it's getting so subverted into
Right?
other areas.
Yeah. And, like, we have to look for therapists that are not religious therapists,
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Or
It's
like I've been fortunate to find, really open-minded and or already pagan therapists,
Mhm.
which
Mm-hmm.
I have seen a lot of people in my community who are queer, who are neurodivergent, and who are witchy, go into the field of being able to become a therapist
Mhm.
or to have become therapists because our community needs therapy from people that
Right.
we
Same.
can that recognize.
Oh,
Yeah.
Same
absolutely.
thing.
And I
Every
mean
time
that,
going into a new therapist, I am queer, I am pagan, and I am poly. Those three things are not going to change.
yeah,
You're trying to tell me that my relationships are based because I have more than one, the ability to be attracted to more than one person. That's what's causing my issues. No, that's not it at all.
right.
There's other
Yeah.
things around it. So, and I have walked away from therapists going, I don't want to spend my hour educating you
hmm
on what these terms mean.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That
And
I
the Oh,
yeah.
I was just gonna echo you and say like the amount of times as a polyhuman that I've had to like have discussions with therapists that I love that I was just like, no, this is not the issue. The issue I'm trying to talk to you about is,
Mhm.
is this trauma, or it's, it's my depression, and this part of my life adds to my life. It doesn't take away from it.
Mhm.
So yeah, absolutely.
If you dig far enough, you'll be able to, people can find, you know, neurodivergent or queer therapists these
Mhm.
days.
Yeah,
So
they
I do
do.
believe they exist, but
Oh,
Yes.
I
again,
believe they exist too. And like all I could think of when you were talking about the new generation becoming therapists to like bring in our future youth and take care of them is we just had it involved, and like that to me in my mind is just all like Bridget, like yep.
Mhm.
And again, that concept of like I can go, we just celebrated the beginning first touches of spring. And so when I look at people trying to like better themselves in their community, I can choose to engage with that happily instead of like maybe returning to the darker thoughts in my mind where, maybe I'm going to think about how the fact that like it's really hard out there. And yes, you can find queer therapists if you look really hard, but like we have to look really hard for everything.
Mhm.
Can't one thing be
yeah,
easy? Like the one thing to like do the hard thing, can't that be easy?
yeah,
But instead, I'm just really happy to see that
yeah,
those sprouts are taking place in
yeah,
our community. Talk as a generation a lot about, healing wounds from the past and how much of that we feel so significantly. And the ways we engage in self-healing are a large part of that. And giving ourselves space to do that is a large part of that. And right now, in the capitalistic hellscape that we live in,
Mhm.
not everybody has $200 a session to go to therapy.
right,
Mhm.
yeah. And sometimes if you try to go through your insurance, they're going to assign you a therapist instead of allowing you to choose one,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
and then you don't know what you're going to end up with, and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's not good.
Absolutely.
So
Um,
thank goodness we have healers in our communities, in our spiritual
yeah,
communities, and
absolutely.
yeah,
And I love seeing these communities step into that again, because
Mhm.
we are seeing that. One of the other aspects to like why we're seeing an increase in the way people are engaging with witch practices and paganism has to do with where we're getting as a society with sexism. We're only
Mhm.
just getting to a point where women have the freedom to engage in these practices again. I feel like people have forgotten that
right,
only
Right.
a couple hundred years ago, that's only a few generations, women were being killed.
Mhm.
mm-hmm.
Were being killed. And so we're seeing this uprising again of specifically women and non-binary people stepping into their power and taking it back, and
Yes,
then re-engaging and turning around back to their loved ones in their community and saying, I've learned this and now
yeah,
I want to share it with you.
because I want to see you empowered too, because we're all going to change this world.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yes,
Mm-hmm. Every little witch here's growing up in their magical journey. Intent is everything. Practicing magic doesn't matter if you have organic produce or if you picked your herbs next to the freeway,
yep,
Mhm.
because the way that you're engaging with it, the intent behind it is what matters. And the same rules apply in therapy. You
Mhm.
can go to therapy for years and not get anything out of it
Mhm.
until you intentionally engage in it.
Right. You do the work.
I swear, I'm gonna get a neon sign and put it up. Do the work. Just do it, babe. Do the work. I'll be right there holding their hands up for them.
Mhm.
Well, okay, I remember you talking a lot about like brain development
Yeah,
and
Mhm.
I was actually gonna say, some of the ways that I help people with that. I work with children a lot. I specifically work with a lot of neurodivergent children, and seeing and engaging in different forms of communication and teaching with children and the way it helps them grow up has been so expansive to my mind and
Mhm.
really changed the way I've engaged with the world around me. And again, in combining that with hyper focuses, as you do, I started seeing a pattern in brain growth development. And at first, it was just like brain growth development, and like where I suddenly felt a pull in a direction. But like as an adult, I'm stepping back and seeing all of these other people have had the same experience. And one of my favorite examples for this is like everybody goes through a like a pantheon phase. You know,
Mm.
it's like sixth grade. You're
Mhm.
really into Greece or you're
Yeah.
really into Egypt, and it's
Mythology. Yes.
whole thing. You read every single story. And I was that person. Like I did
yeah, me
1
too.
week of Greek studies and I was like, done. Athena is all. Like,
Mhm.
and I was
So
so
relatable.
and see. And every queer goes through this moment. And if you talk about it like this, they all go, oh yeah. And oh, but for me it was Vikings. Or,
Uh-huh.
you know, like, or
Mhm.
Right.
for me it
Whatever it
was
was.
whatever
Whatever.
it was. Well, the fascinating part for me is that what you see in children is major points of growth happening in the brain. So I'm going to explain the amygdala a little bit, just because it's a big word. People don't always know what it is. The amygdala is part of your brain that processes. First of all, it's meant to protect you, so it's supposed to quick process your fight or flight.
Mhm. Okay.
And what that in effect does is also bounce your emotions all over the place. Your amygdala growth happens in in a normal situation, it happens in some spurts. And then in trauma situations, the amygdala takes over. One of the things you see often is memory problems
Okay.
in someone who's engaged with trauma, even if they don't have a dissociative system. So even if they're not so traumatized that they're checking out of their body, there's still a short-term memory problem there that happens. And that's because when you live in trauma for long enough, your amygdala starts to take over and you just stay in that fight or flight mode. And the amygdala grows, but it's so close to your memory factories in your brain that your memory factories shrink and your amygdala takes over.
Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it takes a
Rude.
rude,
I have
rude.
a massive amygdala.
Oh,
Thanks. You're welcome.
it's where you keep all that volume.
Yeah, I got it. Cool.
It's my amygdala.
It's my amygdala. Thank you. I'm
Sorry,
gonna
my eyes
go
are
around when people are like, "I really like your hair color." I'm like, "It's for my amygdala. Thank you.
exactly.
It's the trauma on my body." No. It's
Um,
because I cocooned and I gooed and I became a butterfly. Okay.
The amygdala. It's that space in your brain. It's your fight or flight moment. And so those times in your life where you're like super reactive and you're
Hmm.
you're flying off the handle and you don't know why, and you're come back and you're like, why did I do that? That's your amygdala. And it's trying to protect you. Also, for not for nothing, the amygdala growth that happens in children is also when parents are most miserable.
Oh,
Um,
noted. Thanks.
noted. So there's a big growth around 3.
Terrible threes.
That well, terrible twos are and then the tornado threes or
No,
whatever.
I called mine the three-nager.
Exactly. Well, and that is actually, I have always said 2-year-olds are amazing.
Yes.
People
Mm.
just don't know how to communicate with them.
Yeah.
At 3 is where they
Yeah.
start having opinions. They start
Mhm.
having
No.
needs outside of your own, and they start
Mm.
having emotional reactions that are purely theirs. Hi, amygdala. Like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
there it is.
they don't have words to tell you what's going on and you can't read
Mhm.
their brains, but they still think you can.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's the
Mhm.
crazy thing is learning when people can't read your brain as a kid. Yeah. Because when they're young, they have this because at first you kept them alive, so they just assume you
Right.
know what you're
Yeah.
doing.
Exactly.
That's
Teaching
the
that.
best part is growing up and realizing. And if you haven't had this realization and you're a listener, you're welcome for this. But guess what? Your parents didn't know what they were doing.
Mm-mm. They're learning as they're going along, especially if you had young parents
Oh,
Yep.
or
that
you're the
is.
first child.
It's something I talk about with my eldest because I have a blended family, and I came into parenting my eldest child when they were still a baby. They were just under one, and I was 18.
So
Mhm.
you were also still a baby
I was
in some
also still a
ways.
baby, and so we have some really funny conversations because now they're 17, and so I'm like, so
Could you
like I
imagine?
know, can you? But
Right.
like right now, if you were doing that, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing. Trying really hard to make up for it though.
Aw. You've learned a lot since then.
I have. But the going back to the amygdala growth. So
Mhm.
amygdala growth happens around 3, and then again it happens around 8. I can promise you some of the listeners out there with 8 and 9-year-old kids are like, oh my god, because nobody understands why their kid is an asshole at 8. It's because their amygdala is growing. But also tell me those are 2 moments in life where you see them grasp onto things too. That's when they get
Mhm.
a favorite thing, right? That's when they get a comforting thing. 3 is when magic is 100% real. Disney
Mhm.
Yeah.
magic is real life.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, and then the 8 to 12, like you see that growth, and the reason I liked the growth around the 11 or 12, and I know that I had said it was significant to me because that's when I was discovering pantheas and
Mhm.
mythoses and things like that. But it's also one of the first big independent amygdala growth points, where like their body's already starting to become an adult. It's a really tumultuous time for a lot of us.
Mhm.
Mm.
It's middle school to high school.
It's tweens.
It's tweens. Everything hurts. Everything's on fire.
Mhm.
Nobody's happy. And we're all trying really hard to be. And then you see this crossover of a gravitation towards these comforting rituals.
Mhm.
One of my favorite books when I was younger was The Egypt Game, and I don't
Hmm.
know if any of you guys read that.
Mm-mm.
It's definitely like an elementary school level read. And these kids were obsessed with Egypt, and they made a secret altar space where they would go out, they'd do their school day, and they'd hate life, and then they'd come back into their secret space. And they had their own play worship with their deities, and it was really hard for them to reconcile that with the outside world and having to
Mhm.
go back and forth, and how
Mhm.
important their Egypt game was to them on in their personal levels.
I
Um,
wish I'd had that to read as a kid.
you can
I
still read it.
I
this
It's
will.
really good.
It
I
sounds great. No,
will.
you said that, and I'm going. I all of a sudden I flash back to the. It wasn't the Egypt game, but the book series that I read in middle school that I was obsessed with,
Mhm.
was by Tamora Pierce, In the Hand of the Goddess.
Oh, I love Tamora Pierce. I think
And
everybody should read Tamora
oh
Pierce.
God, yes. But I did. I obsessed over that in middle school. That
Hmm.
12 teen 12
Yeah.
13 area. But yeah, that whole series. And again, just the name, In the Hand of the Goddess. And I just had this like smack in my face going, duh, all of a sudden right here in just in that.
Because we find this media, right? We find this way that
Hmm.
we are
Yeah.
engaging in something, and at that age we kind of feel like it's a little silly, it's a little babyish, but it's secret to us.
Hmm.
Or maybe you are secure enough that it's not secret, and you're just the kid at school who's obsessed with Egypt or Norway or whatever. Like my
Hmm.
kid's the dinosaur kid, and she don't get to whatever. I don't know. But what crosses over there again, because that amygdala growth is happening, you need comfort, you need security, your feelings are going everywhere, and you have no idea to control them. But do you know what else is happening at 12? That is the beginning of your F mom and dad.
Hmm.
Teachers don't understand you, parents don't understand you, your friends hopefully get you, but like most kids still withhold a lot from their social circles. And so you need that comfort.
Hmm.
You
Mhm.
need that emotional bond to something, and the other half of it physically, the changes that your body is going through.
Yeah.
Engaging in regulatory practices and rituals are so good for that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense. You find this thing, and then you you start doing it, and the repetitive behaviors
Mm.
that come with it are actually, you're self-therapizing yourself through a really hard time in life.
Hmm.
You
And the
know,
reason why
it's
you gravitate in that direction is because of how your brain is growing.
it's really funny that you say this because what it's bringing up for me is around that age, I was seeking spirituality a lot.
Hmm.
Mhm. Mhm.
But then I had to seek it from the pool that it was being offered to me through. So
Mhm.
this was when I was going to Christian youth groups
Hmm.
and,
Yeah,
Christian
me too.
choir practice and,
Hmm.
yeah. And so then, in the back of my mind, ever since
Mhm.
sixth grade in Greek mythology,
Oh, yeah.
I was definitely like, but what if people still worship the old gods? And as
I
soon as I became an adult and found out that they did, I joined the circle. Yeah.
when I was going to Christian churches, I wished we could live in a world where those
Yeah.
gods were real.
Hmm.
They are.
I right, I know, but like I remember that feeling of like
Yeah.
I loved being um engaged in my community the way it was very comforting to me. But
Hmm.
I wish that I could have my goddesses back and
Yeah.
Hmm.
my values. I wish that I could have those things. And then later on when I left the church, the thing that I realized I missed the most out of it were the rituals. I
Hmm.
missed prayer more than anything in my life.
Prayer is
And
also another word for meditation
exactly. And it took me years to figure that out. It really did take me years. I mourned
and
leaving
ritual.
the Christian church for so long,
Mm.
and I wished that I could engage with it again purely because I wanted the comfort of prayer.
Hmm.
I wanted the comfort of taking what I was holding and releasing it to the universe, to the ethos. I wanted the comfort of knowing I was allowed to sit and ruminate and discuss with my universe where I was going with this and why. And it was
Mhm.
so lonely without it.
Hmm.
It was. And
Yeah.
it really wasn't until years later, like as an adult, like years after I left the church, like I spent some years mourning it and then years building up my own practices. And then even after that, that I was like, well, I can still pray. And then sitting with prayer and realizing that I had been struggling so hard in therapy to sit with my feelings
Hmm.
and allow them to exist. And that is something that, especially in this day and age where we are all so busy and inundated with shit, like making a moment to sit and let your bad feelings out on purpose. Not only does that sound like the worst thing ever, but just like, who got time for that?
Hmm.
But that's what we do with prayer.
Hmm.
And prayer is sacred and it's protected and it's important.
I also often say that when people come to me for tarot readings or oracle or numerology, even,
Hmm.
Hmm.
that sometimes it's like confession.
Yeah.
You know, you need to be able to talk about what's going on with you right now,
Hmm.
even if we just pull cards to spurt on the conversation.
Hmm.
Oh, I think tarot is absolutely a form of mindfulness. And if you've ever sat down with a draw for me, like I always sit down and I explain, like, I'm not going to tell you the future. I'm not going
Yep.
to tell you
Hmm.
something you don't know. What we're going to do is we're going to pull and you're going to feel, and then we're going to interpret that to
Hmm.
like I
Yep.
and I can't tell you where you're going in life, but I can tell you if you sit with this feeling in this moment with what you're telling me, you're probably going to go this way.
Hmm.
But you can engage with this house and go the other way. And the thing that I love about like people who try and disprove tarot and psychics and all of that is they go, oh, they got all of that just off of interacting with you. Well, that's actually.
Right.
That's the point.
Isn't that what you're paying me for? Is to hear you and to reflect that back to you so that you can hear yourself? Like,
Yeah,
duh.
yeah. And
Yeah.
sorry,
There are
isn't
also
that what a therapist does?
right. I mean,
Or a
but there
healer.
are there are the
Or a
snake
healer?
there are the
Yeah,
seancers and the snake oil salesmen and people who are
absolutely.
kind of running a scam. So,
Oh yeah, protect yourself.
right, use discernment,
Mhm.
don't be,
Mhm.
but yeah, there's also definitely
Yeah.
the community healers that
Hmm.
are, had some kind of hyper focus into a healing modality, and
Yeah,
and if it works for you, it works for you. If it's accessible
absolutely.
for you, do what helps. Do what
Mhm.
helps you.
Yeah, and like I got into drawing tarot because of the aesthetic. Like it was cool. I like the again. I was somewhere between 12 and 16.
Mhm.
Yep. Sounds about right.
And it was really fascinating to me. It was really pretty. And then like my decks followed me around for a while. I had them. And then as an adult, I started pulling them out again. And it was always like when I was so enmeshed in my own feelings and self that I just felt miserable and I couldn't figure out why.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know why I'm upset. I don't know why my body feels like this. I cannot figure out where my brain is going to go. So I pull tarot cards. And
Yeah.
then just in reading the cards, it
Yeah.
told me what was going on in my mind because
Yeah.
I was able to release
Mhm.
any direction and just engage with my feelings in my brain as they hit. And those concepts, people spend years working on that in therapy
Mhm.
and trying to conceptualize it and make it happen regularly.
Hmm.
And trying to just like tell your brain to do that doesn't work for most people. And we have tools for that.
Mhm.
Yay,
Again,
tools.
in my toolbox. You want
Yay.
to know what's on my mind? Let me sit and stim and
Yep.
fidget, and then we'll all talk about what Ace of Cups has to say today. Like,
Mhm.
That's a good choice. A good random choice out there.
duh.
Before we move on from talking about the amygdala and the brain
Mhm,
development,
Mhm.
there was one thing that we haven't yet touched on that I wanted to, that I find very important for people to know. Because I was fortunate enough to be tuned into this at around that time in my life. But the brain is not done growing at 18. Just
no,
because
no.
you're an adult legally, you're actually still, your brain is still developing, and it actually keeps going up until the age of 27. That's
Mhm,
why a lot of, well, there's the 27 club, and that's one thing, but there's, within that, there are people who live life to its fullest with not much care for their mortality.
mhm,
Mhm.
They could be tend to be careless, or not really thinking about long-term consequences.
mhm.
So your amygdala, your brain, all the entire brain in its entirety doesn't reach its full like peak
Oh
or
yeah, it's
Mhm.
adult brain until age like 26, 27, 28, which
uh-huh.
also kind of astrologically ties into your Saturn return, because
Mhm.
Saturn, the planet of Saturn, who is like the bringer of your destiny, it,
Mhm,
and wants to put you to work, has like a 27-28 year cycle that he comes back around to your birth chart.
mhm,
And so people think, I think we do children a disservice by, at least this is how I was, the trajectory I was given in our
mhm,
society was, all right, you go to school, you pick what you want to be when you grow up, and then you go to school for that, and then you focus in on that, and then you become, and that's your career, and you
mhm,
retire from that one day. And that is not actually how that's, I've yet, I
Mm-mm.
mean, maybe back in the boomer generation, that's how it worked, but that's not how it works these days. You are born with multiple destinies. Your passions will shift and change over time. You will reach certain ages
Mhm.
or certain brain developments
mhm,
where what you once loved and what mattered most to you, you're kind of through the end of that phase, and you have a whole new passion that you want to focus on. And that's also why you'll find a lot of people who do make it through 27, 28 tend
mhm,
to, will often want to shift careers or start a
Mhm.
family, or
mhm.
um move or start a business, or
Yeah.
this, that, or the other. And then once again, 28 years from then, in your 50s, you're disillusioned and with what you've been doing, and you want something else before you run out of time. And so these patterns are very fascinating. And yeah, I
Mhm.
think it's important that we know that our brain isn't fully developed as adults until we're really later into the adult.
Absolutely. And
Mhm.
there's another piece to that that I saw something fascinating on recently, and it kind of ties into what you were saying, and it's that we raise children in a process of constantly getting ready. Getting
Mm,
ready for what? What are they getting
yeah.
ready for? We, like, as babies, we get them ready to walk, to run, to crawl. As toddlers, we get them ready for kindergarten. And then at kindergarten is getting them ready for elementary school, which is getting them ready for middle school, which is getting them ready for high school, which is getting them ready
For whatever else comes
for what,
talking. Yeah.
Hmm.
for college, um for a career, what have you. And the trajectory for that process, like, drops you off a cliff before you're even done growing.
Hmm.
Right. Right.
It
And I had a huge epiphany somewhere along the way that there's actually no graduation in life. You keep learning. There's no end to it.
Mhm.
It's and I'm not saying that the milestones aren't important to celebrate,
Oh,
Hmm.
right.
but if you're always going and never arriving, that can be a distressful thing for the brain.
Yeah. And even if you kind of pull apart the concept of it, like, I've heard commencement instead of graduation. What are you
Hmm.
commencing forth into?
So now you've arrived at the next stage, but it's still part of what it was, and it's just you're still moving forward.
So, maybe give early 20s you a break.
Hmm.
Exactly.
For
Whether
those of
that's
you of our
you're
listeners
looking, yes.
who
Whether it's
are in
us
your
looking back or
right, for
sorry.
those of you who are in your early 20s, you have lots more to look forward to. For those of you who have crossed that Saturn returns threshold, I don't know of a single person who hasn't looked back and going, wow, at 30 something, 40 something. I did. I hit 27 to 31 were these years where I became this completely different person. And it's again that change of the Saturn's returns, is that change
Mhm.
of your growth. Your brain has finally stopped growing
Mhm.
in that sense, still learning and still processing neural pathways and all
Yes.
that kind of stuff, but the brain itself has developed to that point. And it's so funny looking back and
Mhm.
seeing, again, not knowing what the term was, not knowing what this was. I
Uh-huh.
didn't come in contact with the term Saturn returns until much later.
Mm.
But once I'd heard it, it's like, oh, that
Yeah.
explains what happened at that period of time. And almost
Mhm.
everyone I know, I can't think of a single person, including looking back and watching like my mom's life trajectory and all that other kind of
Mhm.
stuff that
Mhm.
shifted at any given point in time when
Yeah.
you reach it. And that doesn't have anything to do with queerness or religion or faith or anything
Mhm.
else. It's just a natural progression of
Life
something that happens to
cycles.
us. It's a life cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's a little fun bit that is kind of popping in my brain while you're talking through this. Saturn returns is a term that we use, right,
Hmm.
in the witchy community, and that came from previous generations of healers and magic people before
Hmm.
us. And so, like, tying it back to these people were our therapists before. They were the people observing these patterns in life and going, "Oh, this has happened to this many generations. We've seen it go again and again," and then they gave it a name.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
then later on, we find out how they're tied together. But, like, they were literally already talking about with Saturn returns of, and this is the part where you're taking the next step.
Hmm.
But they gave it this term.
Yeah.
And again, if you were to talk about it in terms of, like, yeah, reach the age where your brain is fully hardened and blah blah blah, that sounds more credible than walking around and going, "Oh yes, my Saturn has just returned."
And so often we can use science to explain magic and magic to,
Mhm.
supplement science. They
Mhm.
aren't opposites.
Hmm.
They're
No.
actually friends, if not cousins and or intimate
That's
partners.
that's the one thing I'm going to nerd out here for just a second. Is I loved in the second Thor movie, they had idea where they go to Asgard, which again, this idea of
Mhm.
magic, and magic is just science that hasn't been explained yet. And I loved that in the theater as
Yep.
this kind of explanation of that's what it is, because once upon a time it was magic if you took chamomile to calm you down.
Right.
But now we know
Mhm.
what the properties are of, say, that particular plant, what the how the chemical reactions are on the
Mhm.
body, and everything else. Magic is just science that hasn't been explained yet, and I love
Mhm.
that. Love that so much.
Yeah. And we, in our communities, we engage with them and we share with them. We don't gatekeep them.
Mm-mm.
Like, if you talk to any witchy person you know and you come to them with an ailment, they'll dig around and find you a
Hmm.
jar or something, and they'll go, "Oh, this really worked for me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I grow this in my garden to take care of my headaches. I blah 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 blah." Like, it is part of being in the witchy community is engaging and healing not only with yourself but also with the environments around you.
Hmm.
Mhm. And also, one thing I love about real community is if someone doesn't have an answer, it's not a like, sorry, it's a I don't know. Let me help you find that out.
Mhm.
Let's ask the right people, or let's inquire over here. Like
Mhm.
there is
I
so
know
much
someone.
of yeah,
Right.
oh, so often it is I know someone, or I know the right person to ask for
Hmm.
this.
It's funny because we go through things like that in my house all the time, where like I'll pull something out and our roommate or my spouse or something will be like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Just hold on, let me hear." And they go, "How did that work?" And I go, "Just stick with me, kid." Like, my partner was floored recently when he wasn't feeling well because I taught him the smelling rubbing alcohol trick. If you're nauseous
Yeah.
or like feeling like you're going to throw up, you can just take a little bit of rubbing alcohol and smell it, and it cuts through the nausea right away. And he literally, like, that whole night, he kept the bottle next to him. He's like, "How do you know this?" And I'm a witch. I got lots of potions and treats that'll make your body feel better. Like,
Hmm. Same
I
thing.
love it.
I recently found, for me, chamomile and passion flower has been the thing that keeps my anxiety. Just it takes it down and cuts it in half. And I found these pills once upon a time, but I happened to find some sleep pills that also have a little bit of melatonin, so that helps with sleep. And it just my partner, same thing. Is like they have a really hard time sleeping, but it's like it cuts through the anxiety, which makes the anxiety dreams less, which makes sleep a lot more smooth. And it's like, how did you know this? Like, these are the ingredients that I've been trying to do and trying to tell people, but it's like you don't listen. It's like it's the witchy thing. It's these things that we just
Also,
know work.
tying back to my subject again, what you're doing is creating new positive neural pathways in your brain. And every time you engage in doing it, even if you're only doing it half-heartedly, you're still creating those positive pathways in your brain
Hmm.
that help ease your anxiety.
Exactly.
Nice.
All right. So we've talked about the amygdala, we've talked about a whole bunch of other things. What else are we doing? What are we giving? How are we giving ourselves the dedicated time to have our brain development, have our focus, have our rituals? What
Mm-hmm.
are these kinds of things that we're doing, and when are we doing them to make time for ourselves?
I love that question because I am I am a parent, as I've already said, and I engage a lot with my communities. And so, as one of those people, I immediately fall into like the haggard mom in the kitchen role. Every
Hmm.
Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every Easter, like I have done the thing. I have created the meal. My family is here. Don't talk to me.
Hmm. Hmm.
I um and the one time that I actually get to embrace what these seasons are about for me is the Sabbaths. Um,
Hmm.
because that is a time where I'm going, this is important to me. And
Mm-hmm.
it's for me. And I'm giving it the shelter of spirituality and holiness.
Hmm.
Because, like, no one would ask you to cancel Christmas dinner
Right.
to,
Right.
like, go to the movies or something. But, like, if I say that I am staying home and, I need to do my Imbolc celebration, or, oh no, I'm sorry, I can't go out this, to the lake with you that night. It's my Beltane ritual. Like,
People look at you weird.
it's not important to them.
Hmm.
So creating that space for Sabbaths for me means that I get to engage and renew those rituals for me, because it's so easy. It's so easy for things to fall off,
Hmm.
and for you to stop the self-care or stop the journaling, or like
Yeah.
maybe at the beginning it was easy to make 5 minutes in your morning to meditate, and your kid has had a rough few months of school and that flew out the window, but you still need it. Well, there's a holiday coming for that.
Hmm.
And you can sit and engage in it in a way that is protected by you once you
Mm-hmm.
give it that level of worth.
Hmm.
You can say that this is for me, this is for my mental health, and it is as important as Christmas.
Hmm.
It is as important as, I mean, in my house, it is Halloween, should probably be the the gauge for it. But then you get to protect that, and it gets to be just for you.
Hmm.
I have spent years like feeling like a bad practitioner because it's hard for me to hit the Sabbaths.
Hmm.
It's hard for me to make the time and space for me to engage in those things. But every year I try to add a little bit more.
Hmm.
And so again, those cycles and those processes, and on, on the mundane side of things, what I'm doing is prioritizing my self-care. I'm acknowledging my own worth and value, and I'm reinforcing that positively.
Mm-hmm.
On the witchy side of it, I'm growing and engaging more in different layers every time. It makes me think of the concept, like, if you're going to do something, you should do it well, you should do it right, is like a thing a lot of us heard growing up, but that
Mm-hmm.
concept doesn't actually work. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I'm never, like, if you're depressed and haven't brushed your teeth in a week and you only have the energy to brush your teeth for 3 seconds, then you freaking did it. You brushed your teeth.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing is going to apply to practices. Like, a lot of times we think that we have to be a certain level, or we have to be engaging with it at a certain amount. But the fact is, even if you are only taking a few minutes out of the day to engage in your Sabbath, in your moon ceremony, even if it is literally just putting the bowl outside and then coming back the next day to get it,
Mm-hmm.
you are intentionally engaging in things that you are passionate about and that are healing your brain.
Yes.
And that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
I personally find a lot of satisfaction in following the moon cycles, and trying to go say hello to the full moon, or connect with people over full moon energy, and also connect with myself over new moon energy.
Yeah.
So yeah, just whatever personal practices you want to do around, but that makes it a very reliable cycle of checking in, just like the Sabbats for you, eight in a year. You could go all out, or you could join a community event, or you could do your own thing, or a
Yeah.
combination of any of those, depending on the time of year
Yeah.
and what's available. But also just, your own personal cycles, your own moon cycle, or your moon cycles,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
depending.
And to kind of expand a little bit more on what Shay was asking, so holidays and like protecting those is one way, but one of the things that I have always liked about the accessibility of magic is spell work.
Mm-hmm.
And spell work is for me, it's so fun.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
It's so fun. I love looking with intent for the things that I'm going to use. You can't see with the blurred background, but I have a garden that I pull from.
Aww.
I love spending the time nurturing that and growing it. And so, again, engaging in therapy.
Yep.
I
Mindfulness.
mindfulness, yeah. And one of the things that, like, when I was kind of forming more around this idea, I was realizing as I was watching these other humans out in the world that were engaging in spell work, and they would do things like beauty spells and love spells and money spells. And I love when you talk about, the love with sarcasm. Oftentimes when you interact with skeptics, and they ask you, like, oh, do you really think that, putting the rice and the bay leaf and the cinnamon stick in the pot is going to make you rich? Like, tomorrow you're going to win the lottery? And I'm not going to tell you if you do or don't, but I do know that if I did that and tomorrow I find out that, like, I have extra time to pay a bill, I feel so good about myself. Like, because I have
You mean that one
decided.
time when you manifested a house at the last minute in the darkest hour?
Yeah, I did do that.
You did do that with a spell.
I did, yeah. I did. When I was talking about, we had a moment in our life in the past year where we were really struggling with housing, and we're running out of options, and we had found a spot that was gonna work. And I came home from that, and I lit up my altar, and I spent some time calming myself because I was very stressed, and just focusing on the intent of what we wanted. And, like, I left little offerings out there, and I just took a moment to calm myself in the middle of this storm and really hope for what could be helpful and save our family. And anyways, we applied for it that night, and the next morning we found out we got it.
Yeah.
Nice.
And
you felt really good about
I
yourself.
felt really good. And my partner turned to me. At one point he said, "You know that you did this, right?" And I was like, I don't know about that? And he was like, no, you did this. You made this happen. And then, like, to further go down the rabbit hole, like, later on, we found out some of our chosen family had lived in this house before us
Yes.
that had, like, been the roots of where one of our mutual communities had grown from.
Nice.
I remember
And that's
this.
the yard that I'm sitting in right now.
Yeah.
No,
And
it's
gardening in this season.
Yeah. And so to go back to go back to the spell work thing is so I'm already engaging in mindfulness practices for my spell materials. And then I
Yes.
am taking that time for myself and engaging with my emotions when I'm setting the scene. I am, whether it's, music or incense or lotion or something, there is something that is helping signify to my brain that this is the time when we do this.
Mhm.
And so then those parts of my brain that are engaged with those types of healing and repeated ritual are able to transition in, right? And then tell me that a beauty spell is not also just taking those spells and taking them a step further. So when you do the spell, you put some are just you put the ingredients in and then you meditate on it, and some are you have to go through the steps, and the steps themselves are often rooted back to the mindfulness acts. And I brought up beauty spell because I love beauty spells, and I'm having a hard time thinking of the word for them, but they're like the catch your eye spells. I don't know how many people I've seen out there that are like, oh yeah, I always do a little spell in my husband's coffee so that his eye follows me and da 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 da. You do that spell, you take that time, put the cinnamon in the coffee, and you make the star, and you walk into your day going, he's not gonna be able to take his hands off me. Then that's what's gonna happen.
Right. It's an energetic presence that happens with that too. I was thinking of I personally haven't done money spell or beauty spells or anything like that. But I think of like abundance spells where people think like money, money, money and everything else. But if you're doing abundance spells, oftentimes you're doing the work behind it. So you have the offering, you're putting it on with your jade, with your other ingredients, and putting it all together. You're writing on the bay leaf, you're burning on the bay leaf. At the same time, you're putting in applications to jobs. You are doing the things that go behind it to help you get to another place. Could it happen without the stuff? Possibly, but at the same time, what it's doing is, like you said, retraining your brain and helping you focus on what it is that you're working towards, and that will naturally get you farther than just not spending that time to focus.
Yeah, and when it's your magic, when it's your power, it gets a priority.
Yeah.
So it kind of steps above everything else. And you are going to allow yourself to prioritize your energy going towards those things to make the abundance happen. It frees you.
But
I see a hand.
Yep, that's me. But and also, I want to point out that we talked about doing the work, and it is important, like what Shay had mentioned, that don't just do the spells. Don't stop there.
No.
You have to do the spell, but like you wouldn't have gotten the house if you had not applied for it.
Right.
You have to do the
It wasn't going
legwork
to
too.
fall into my
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. So I have a couple of weird things, like the misconception of like, oh, you do a spell and now you're going to be rich. No, I do a spell and then I, mastermind a business that brings in the wealth that I need to make. Like you do the spell and then you do the work.
Well, yeah, and I think that spell work also changes the way you accept things that come into you. So you do the work, and then you are just more open
to receiving. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The other thing I also find really fascinating about witches this day and age is that there are people doing spells on TikTok. Because back in my day, you're not supposed to talk about the workings that you do.
Okay, but I have a response to this.
I want to know because I will always remember that was my initial training. And I'm
And
very secretive of
absolutely.
any actual workings that I do.
Well, you were trained that way because of all of the witches that were killed.
Oh,
That's a trauma
great.
response.
Yay, trauma.
I mean, it's not your trauma, but it is one that you're
No.
carrying.
Yep.
It's a
That makes
previous
sense.
generation's trauma that you're carrying. But when you look back at previous generations and how they passed down their skills and their magic through their healers, it was passed down through stories.
Yeah.
That's what, like, I want to say to everyone who ever discredits like someone who, oh, you just saw that on TikTok. Well, how do you think, like, our ancestors, they didn't have TikTok, but they did sit around the fire and tell each other stories, and then we passed it down again and again and again. And it
My
is something that has been lost to so many cultures. And, like, I would argue, like, as Americans, we don't have that as a safe practice.
yeah. Yeah,
But
it's funny that you
that's
say
what the
that.
new generation is doing.
Yeah.
They're sharing their magic and their stories and their culture and their spoken word the way we have for as long as we have.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I've so often thought that um, to my ADHD brain, the short uh, info dump on TikTok is very appealing, but
Mhm.
also it reminded me of a modern day oral traditions being
Mhm.
passed around, people
Yeah.
telling their stories. I just love getting to know what I mean. I'm a biography reader anyway. I like
Mhm.
watching documentaries and reading biographies. So TikTok is, and it keeps you in touch with what the different generations are doing. Like,
Absolutely. And I think that, I'm very confident we are going to kind of look back at this point in our history and the where we're going, and this specific set of years is gonna be an integral big hinge in society. And I honestly really do think that so much of that is TikTok. We had 3
just
years
being
where we
able
all
to.
just had to sit at home and we could not contact each other. The only way we could talk and um and interact with our world was to was oral tradition. And then that oral tradition that we were exchanging on a global scale and actually giving the time and space for unlocked so many things in people. So many of us know people who figured out that they were trans, or
Yep.
that maybe their relationships weren't serving them or anything like that in those moments of of connection done through like speaking in oral tradition.
Yep. Also, it just reminds me of like how of something a quote that I was going to say earlier and didn't, but now I'm going to have to because you bring
Okay.
something up again. Is my one of my favorite little cliches is we are human beings, not human doings.
Hmm.
So something that the shut down and it so on a global scale, mass amounts of people stopped doing doing and had
Hmm.
to be for a while.
And didn't know how.
Isn't that sad?
And what did they do when they didn't know how?
Some of them went to therapy
Some of them went to
or went back
therapy.
to therapy, but yes, also that's funny that you say that because I have noticed that there is a huge influx of baby pagans
Hmm.
from the TikTok generation.
Hmm. They have access to it. And I particularly love that it's giving access to people who are in unsafe environments. They would not be able
Yes.
to look into, pursue, use these tools wherever they live. Maybe it's their family, maybe it's their neighbors, maybe it's their school. It doesn't matter. But now they can safely, in their own space, still find this out and reach for it in, small increments that
And
are
then
accessible to them.
unlock their own magic, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and come into their own power. And again,
Yep.
like I said, doing it even a little bit is still enough.
I
So
love that.
even if you're just learning from, a couple followers 90 seconds at a time, it's
Yep.
still doing something for you. And every time your brain goes there and then you reroute it back or what have you, you're teaching your brain and your body something.
And
Yeah.
what I love about the idea is there's always like, well, someone's teaching you wrong. That everything is not correct on the internet, obviously, kind of
Right.
thing. But is it wrong? Is it always truly wrong when you're talking about magical practices and everything
Mhm.
else? Because just because someone does it one way and someone else does it another, are either of them wrong, or is that the
Mhm.
pathway that works best for them? So I think with the idea of this of the TikTok generation and this getting it in 90 seconds, you might get 4 or 5 different ways to do the same thing. And
Mhm.
you will try those 4 or 5 things and you will find the right way that resonates with you. And it might be from one creator on one time and somebody else there, but you will ultimately find the right way through that
Mhm.
works for the way your brain works,
Mhm. Absolutely.
which you may
Yeah.
have only gotten, oh no, you have to do it this way because this is the way 7 generations have done it for you before.
Mhm. Well, and like Shay, I think I've heard you talk on some of the other episodes about like your book collection of like
Mhm.
that you had secreted away,
Yeah.
and not everybody has a secret floorboard to like hide
Hmm.
it under, and not everybody can go out and buy books. You get one,
Right.
you get
Hmm.
one, and you got to learn it that way. Our youth doesn't have that problem anymore.
Right.
No, they do not. We have hacked that. We made the collective conscious Googleable, and
Hmm.
we created a term called Googleable.
Yeah,
Google is the new Akashic record. Um,
Right, right. And
yeah.
we've made the world smaller. We've made communication easier. We can know what's going on the other side of the globe. We can feel helpless to make improvements in the situation, unfortunately. And it can be overwhelming to our amygdalas to have
Yeah.
that access to that knowledge. But I would rather know and hope that collectively that we can affect change
Hmm.
than live in ignorance and allow atrocities to go unchecked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Really well put. Yeah.
Yay.
Yay. Yay.
Thank you,
oh,
Cats.
Well,
So
I
much.
said,
actually, hold on. I did
I
have
said more.
I oh, okay. I was gonna say there was like one more note that I had, and
Mhm.
it was TikTok and spell work. So
Awesome. That was
Well,
my next question. Is there anything else we missed?
we were, yes, that was going to be the next and last question anyway.
um well, it was just a specific TikTok that, again, with the spell work, it made
Hmm.
me think of how magic is mindfulness, and if I hadn't had access to it that way, like, I don't think those thoughts would have crashed in my brain.
Hmm.
And this woman, she was older than me, and she was like, "There's a fun little schmeck cell for you guys to try out," and all it was meditation while engaging in pleasurable acts about oneself,
Hmm.
and
Oh.
it had to, and it was masturbation, so it was by yourself. You don't have the chance to think of or prioritize anyone else, and it was a
Hmm.
focus on the like environment around you that you were envisioning. Like, you were given a prompt, like, envision yourself somewhere and then grow into the earth.
Wow.
And through that process, you were supposed to accept that just existing and being there in that moment is enough. And then you're pairing it with physical pleasure sensations, and Pavlovian training your body
Hmm.
that you feel good because you're enough,
Hmm.
because you deserve that space, and because you should feel good.
And plus,
And
self-love is an act of self-love.
self
Hmm.
love is an act of self love. And we can talk about like the problems with sex for
Yeah.
for so long, but um, what
It can also be
again? What
healing.
that it can be healing. But what that is, again, is just literal, pure, actual, like, CBT therapy
Hmm.
Mindfulness.
and mindfulness, um, that we're calling a spell,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
I love
and
it.
it is doing magic.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Whenever you're doing those things, in you're creating those pathways in your brain, whenever you are giving yourself the space to exist and acknowledging where you're at, like, that is pure magic. No one can take that away from you. And
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, you wanna call it like DMDR therapy, sure.
We could call it ritual or magic or
Yeah,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Spell work. Do you have any, parting thoughts to bestow upon us?
I think my parting thought would be then that magic has everything to do with intent, and so does therapy, and
Hmm.
so does mindfulness. Mindfulness is intent, and
Hmm.
when you engage in those things together, you get to remove a lot of the things that bar it from us in society that make it harder for us to do those things for ourselves, and you call something back to yourself. And we are seeing ways that we can help heal entire groups of people, kind of going back to how, with the lack of accessibility, but
Mm-hmm.
sharing what we've learned with communities where it's going to heal us, and it's helping to step everyone else out of the past and on a path moving forward.
Kat, I am so grateful that you have been listening to us from the beginning, and
Yes.
I'm grateful to have known you for so long and watched you come into your power,
No, thank
watched
you.
all of this growth, and it warms my heart just listening to all of this wisdom that you're willing to share.
Oh, that's
Add to
means
the
a lot.
collective. Yes. It means a lot to me too, to us, both all of us.
Hmm.
It means a lot. So thank you for being our special guest.
No, well, thank you for having me. I was not really like when I pitched the idea to Damona, I was like, you guys should talk about this. And then they went, do you want to talk
See, it does happen.
okay. But here I am.
I really,
So
really
thank you.
appreciate that you'd be willing to come on. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well,
It helps us out.
anytime. Yeah, I'm happy
Yay!
to.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you all for watching and listening to the Queer Witch Project. And if you were willing to give us a like or give us some 5-star ratings, or go to our YouTube channel and leave us some comments, we would love to hear from you.
And if there is a topic you want to know more about or an episode that you want to suggest, please contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com or find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with the handle @queerwitchproject. We upload every other week. And remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Be yourself and love rebelliously. Bye!
Bye!